Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne, and with me today is Tim Davis. We are going to be talking about overcoming childhood trauma, but we are also going to be talking about being a bipolar triathlete. So Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tracy. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, and I'm thrilled to have you here because your story, just sounds so interesting, from everything that you've accomplished and overcome. So I can't wait to hear all about it. So why don't we start there? Why don't you just dive in and tell us a little bit about your story?
All right. Well, my story begins in Atlanta, Georgia, where I was born back in 1974. I am the third oldest of 7 kids. My parents moved around quite a bit, but my mom was raised in Brooklyn. They met at the University of Florida, and we ended up settling in West by God, Virginia, when I was about 5 years old. And then we moved to Northern West Virginia when I was 8. And I had an older brother who was 4 years older than me, and he got into all kinds of trouble. And he let me tag along with him as his little sidekick. So we started doing recreational things at a very young age. He was in junior high at age 12, experimenting with alcohol and marijuana. And I was 8 years old, and he let me do whatever he was doing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was 8 years old the first time I got drunk and smoked marijuana. And I didn't know it at the time, but, looking back, having done lots of therapy and inventory, I was always an anxious little kid. I suffer from anxiety. That's a symptom of being bipolar disorder. And, having the alcohol and the weed, made the anxiety go away. It took the edge off. It relaxed me. So I really liked the effect it had for me because, I kind of always felt like I didn't fit in. As a younger kid, I kind of got bullied by some kids at school and just felt like an oddball because, my parents always told us to get good grades. So I was kind of a nerd because I always got straight A's. So anyway, that was my MO. And then when I was 13 years old in 8th grade, my dad died. And how he died was a big part of what caused the trauma for me because we were kind of just playing chase and having tickle wars. He had been drinking quite a bit. It was a Saturday and he drank quite a bit on the weekends. Anyway, we were having these tickle wars and we were playing chase. And, when he drank, he kind of tickled a little too hard and didn't realize it. So, we were in his room and I was like, hey, he's tickling too hard. Next time he lets me go, I'm going to take off, and I ran outside I ran out of his room down the hallway and onto our balcony. And then I ran down the balcony to the other end and he was chasing after me. Ha ha ha, I'm going to get you. But he tripped and fell over the balcony and landed head first on a 2-story balcony.
Oh,
and he was basically brain dead on impact. He smashed his first 4 cervical vertebra. If you know anything about physiology, Christopher Reeves smashed 3 and 4, made him quadriplegic. If you smash 1 and 2, you're brain dead. But, they took him to the hospital, kept him on life support for several months before he finally expired. And that was just a traumatic way to spend my 8th grade year. And my older brother, blamed me for his death. So I was carrying that with me for a long time and had a hard time processing that. We were a big Catholic family and my mom told us, the only therapy we need is, a Catholic priest, and go into confession. But that was not giving me what I needed to process the feelings of, feeling like it was my fault that my father died. And that was a big turning point in my life, and that's when I really, having been through several rehabs and done lots of therapy, one of the questions they ask you, when you're new in rehab is, can you pinpoint a time or a specific time in your drinking and using career? Sorry about that.
That's right.
When when you started to drink and use to escape painful, or negative feelings. And mine is very easy. After my dad died and I was blamed for his death, that's definitely when I started to, use drugs and alcohol to escape those feelings that it was my fault that he died, and my older brother was very physically abusive with me. I mean, the night of the accident, he almost put me in the hospital too. So he beat me really bad for like 2 hours in the middle of the night. Like, it was crazy because, the accident happened and my older brother and sister, I need to close that out. Hold on. My older brother and sister, they were both at work at their McDonald's jobs. They were like a junior and senior high school, and, they're like 16, 17. And they came, my sister went to the hospital with my mom and they stayed there all night. My brother came home around 2 or 3 in the morning and ripped me out of my bed. I was in a deep sleep and just proceeded to beat on me for an hour or two. And I just tried to stay in the fetal position and protect myself. And he's kicking and punching me in the ribs, saying it's your effing fault that dad's going to die. I mean, it was very, very, very rough night for me, because as it was, I went to bed thinking my dad's going to die. And then he's telling me it's my fault my dad died. So anyway, flash forward, I graduate from high school and decide to move across the country to go to USC, University of Southern California. And I thought I was going to get this fresh start and start clean there because, after my senior year, I was just like, my drinking and marijuana use, I knew was really bad. So I was going to start fresh in college, but that didn't work. Because I was in college and my roommate introduced me to the stuff called the Chronic back in 1992, right after that album by Dr. Dre came out. And the Chronic type of marijuana was way better than the West Virginia weed I was getting. So anyway, my college years were kind of a blur. I managed to get decent grades, but I always thought I could quit drinking and using whenever I wanted to. And I met my wife to be a freshman year. We moved in together sophomore year and we dated all through college. And I always told her I could quit when I wanted to. At first I said I'll quit when we finish college, because a lot of them will be starting our careers. And then after that, I was like, well, I'll quit when we get married, and we got married a year later. And then I was like, well, I'll quit when you get pregnant because she did it occasionally, I'm like, because you'll have to quit while you're pregnant. So will I. Lo and behold, 2 years later, she gets pregnant. And I'm like, I have this revelation. Well, she's the one carrying the baby. I'm not. So not going to hurt the baby if I keep drinking and using. So I was like, I'll quit when the baby was born. And, my drinking and using got so bad. It was, not too long before the due date. And she's like, I'm worried you're not going to be sober enough to, drive me to the hospital. So I agreed to go to my first meeting, which was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, because I didn't think I had a problem with alcohol at the time. I just thought I had a problem with drugs. And the meeting I went to, the leader of the meeting was talking about how he tried to commit suicide. He jumped off a bridge and he was in a wheelchair. And I couldn't identify with that. And anybody who's been to 12-step meetings, if you hang around for a while, they'll tell you to look for the similarities and not the differences. But a lot of new people are looking for the differences and not the similarities, which is what I was doing. I'm like, I'm not like this guy. I'm not one of you guys. My kind of concept of alcoholics and addicts were like these skid row bums that were homeless, just with a bottle and a brown bag and all that. And I'm like, I'm not like these guys. So needless to say, it took me a while to get back to the rooms, with the threat of divorce and all that after the baby was born. Finally, committed to going to rehab. And I'd get sober for maybe 30, 60, 90 days, maybe even 6 months, but then I'd relapse. And it was after my second son was born that I almost committed suicide. My best idea at the time was that, the world was better off without me. And I was planning on, jumping in front of a train. And I kind of wrote this 6-page suicide letter, and the F word was like every other word. I didn't know it at the time, but I was in a manic episode. I went to the train tracks and I was getting ready to do it. I had called my mom and my wife, right before I went over there. And I'm like, you guys are all better without me. I'm gonna do you a favor. I'm checking out. And they called, 911, and I got swooped up and taken to put on a 72-hour 5150 cycle. And that was when I got evaluated and got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And man, I hated that at first. I was like, I'm having a hard enough time just, trying to get sober and, deal with, accepting that I'm an alcoholic addict. And now you're telling me I'm bipolar. It really made me angry at first because I thought it meant I was crazy. And, I'd seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I thought it meant like I was one of those guys. Anyway, when I was in the 72-hour, psych hold, I thought I was Jack Nicholson because I'm like, I'm not crazy. All these other guys are. The denial was deep, and it took a couple years of, and a lot of reading about what bipolar is and learning that there's a lot of, successful, famous people that also have bipolar disorder, former presidents, billionaires, all kinds of people that have had it, that I don't want to drop names, but you can Google it. And it's like, it kind of gave me some hope. I'm like, well, if all these successful people had it and somehow managed it, so could I. So I finally started getting med compliant, and I got sober at age 33, been sober 14 plus years now. And it was in sobriety that, I learned to become med compliant, go to meetings every day, work 12 steps. But I still needed, I talk about working on the three aspects of, the physical, mental, and spiritual aspect of your recovery. Mm-hmm. And I just have so much, I'm a hypomanic, a type 2 bipolar. I just kind of have so much manic energy. I need to burn it off. So I just started exercising, became an exercise addict. And, my first year in sobriety, I actually gained 60 pounds. So I was up to 250 pounds in 2009. And I was like, something's got to change when I hit 250. I'm like, I'm only 5'9", 250 rounds up to 300. I'm heading the wrong way with the scale. And that's when I just made a commitment to start running and exercising. And that really helped my recovery and my sobriety. A lot of people were like, you finally found a positive addiction. And that's when I got into running all these marathons and triathlons and Ironmans that I've done over the last dozen years now. And
wow, that's amazing. God, I don't even know where to begin here. So, one of the first things I thought of was when you were talking about how your mom, didn't feel that you needed therapy or anything like that. You just needed the church. And, the first thing that popped in my head was, how many Hail Marys does it take to erase the guilt?
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough.
There's not.
Excuse me. So, you've lived with this guilt for years that, you thought it was your fault that your dad died. And it wasn't. It was just an accident. It could have happened to anybody. Could have happened while he was sober, So was it during the meetings or was it in the, when you were on the psych hold that you kind of had that turning point and started maybe letting go of some of that guilt?
Yeah. When I first started going to rehab, I think it was 26 or 27, I started seeing a therapist who was also a recovering alcoholic addict. He had like 15 or 16 years. I was referred to him from the psychiatric hospital I was in. And we made this deal because I didn't want to go to therapy. And I'm like, how long do I have to see you before I'm like, don't have to see you anymore? And he's like, when you get a year sober, then you can stop seeing me. And that took 5 years. And I love the guy. He was great. He helped me realize that it wasn't my fault. And we worked through a lot of stuff. And it was really incremental in my path towards, releasing that trauma, if you will, in the name of your path.
And did you find that also when you started working out, started exercising more, doing the marathons, the triathlons and all of that, not only was it great for your mental health and your physical health, but, for the emotional health and the release of the trauma?
Oh yeah, big time. I still use it as kind of a therapeutic tool. If I have maybe an argument with my wife, which happens rarely now because we both work 12 steps, but, occasionally, or if something else is bugging me, I'll just go for a run, do 5 miles or go swim for a half hour to an hour, or whatever I have time for. And I always feel better afterwards. So yeah, it's huge. Physical exercise really helps the mental health. I don't think we talk about that enough.
Oh, no, I don't think we do either. It's a great outlet for anxiety, for anger, for sadness, for guilt, for, all of these negative emotions. Mm-hmm. And it just really gets the endorphins and everything pumping and really helps to change your mindset. I don't know many people who have a really good workout and come out of it cranky,
Yeah, exactly. My wife usually tells me to go exercise when I start getting cranky. She can She could see it coming. She's like, "You're getting cranky. Go exercise and then come back and talk to me."
There you go. Go for a run and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can see that would be a great outlet. What else has helped you in both your recovery, from your addictions, but also in your recovery from the trauma and accepting your bipolar disorder?
Really, the therapy, seeing my psychiatrist regularly, in the beginning it was like every week or 2 weeks, and now it's just quarterly checkups. I've been on the same dose of meds for 14 plus years. Just a low mood stabilizer. It's risperidone and lamotrigine. But yeah, like we were saying, the medicine wasn't enough to really help with some of the hypomanic energy and the anxiety. And that's the great thing about exercise is you can pretty much do that anytime, so I definitely needed both as far as kind of managing that goes. So it's a lot of stuff. The 12-step work really helped too.
Have you found, or did you think when you were first diagnosed, that there's such a stigma around quote unquote, people being bipolar that you were kind of afraid to have that diagnosis, tell people about it?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Honestly, I've kind of hid behind my diagnosis up until last year when I wrote my book. I didn't like to tell anybody. I was diagnosed in 2003, and no, I was diagnosed in 2002. And up until last year when I wrote the book, only my wife, some close family, and a couple of close friends knew. I was so like kind of ashamed and in denial. Like, I mean, I managed it, but I just didn't want people to know about it because of the stigma, because I was afraid they'd just think I'm crazy. But once I wrote the book, I'm like, oh wow, I'm ripping the Band-Aid off here. And then that made me like, I'm owning it. I'm taking pride in it, and now I'm like an advocate for mental health. I didn't realize writing the book was going to make me, change directions like this, and it's really great to see like Michael Phelps and other big famous people, I'm not famous, but see them really talk about how mental health is important. And then the pandemic, so many more people are talking about it. So it's great where we're shifting to, because I know.
Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to really, kind of be accepting about, mental health and mental illness. Look at what happened in the Olympics with Simone Biles and some of those other athletes who, stepped away because their mental health was much more important than the competition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's an awakening. We have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But there's an awakening happening. There's a shift happening. So it's kind of exciting to watch and to be part of that and to help that along with, just sharing our stories.
Yeah. I like the tennis player, the female tennis.
Yeah. I couldn't think of her name.
She didn't want to do the interviews. And I'm like, yeah, these athletes, they go perform at the highest level. And then right after, they got all these cameras in their face and these microphones in their face. I mean, that would cause me so much anxiety because I don't like speaking in front of large groups. And to think about all those guys just having to deal with it, like that's, acceptable. I admire her. I'm proud of her. It's like, yeah, she shouldn't have to do that if it doesn't make you comfortable.
Right, exactly. And I saw the naysayers out there that were, the haters and all that. And I'm like, well, you obviously just don't get it. And I think that's, a lot of the stigma behind, people thinking that you're crazy because you have bipolar, or that you're, there's something wrong with you because you have a mental illness, or your mental health isn't in check, or, whatever, you're overcoming trauma, etc. I think a lot of that is because they just don't get it.
Yeah. I agree.
And I think that's because, maybe they're either fortunate enough to have never had to deal with it, or they're in denial themselves.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who haven't had to deal with it don't really understand, unless you truly experience something. Yeah, I guess you just can't relate and understand. It's hard to see things from other people's perspective. All of us are kind of so just egocentric, by nature.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to having anxiety. I can relate to depression. I can relate to overcoming trauma. I can't relate to what it's like to be a recovering alcoholic addict. I can't relate to what it's like to be bipolar because I've never had to go through that. So it's hard for me to really, be able to put myself in your shoes. Plus your shoes are probably too big for my feet anyway.
11. Actually 11 and a half for my marathons because your feet kind of swell up when you run long distances. So you need a half size bigger than your
I wear like a men's 7. So yeah. Yeah, so I think that's where a lot of where the haters and the naysayers and stuff come from is just a place of I guess ignorance, really.
Yeah. And that's why we got to keep the conversation going and keep it in the forefront as much as possible. Exactly. I'm a high school teacher, but now I'm actually teaching 5th grade. But in the pandemic, there's been a huge focus in our school district, Los Angeles Unified School District, for K through 12 teachers, and I think districts across the nation and the world on social emotional learning. And we start the day with like a mindfulness check-in and a focus on one aspect of social emotional learning with all these students, because these students are going through all kinds of issues with them, some of them social anxiety. They've gotten really comfortable. They'll turn on the Zoom class, but I'm teaching in a virtual academy, but they want to keep their camera off because they're camera shy. There's all kinds of different issues, some of them adjusting to going back to in-person school. And so there's all these mental health issues for the children around that we need to, try and address so they can feel okay, with their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead, before it was just we wanted to stick them in a box, and they had to conform to that box no matter what. For my household, the pandemic was actually kind of a godsend because both my girls are doing so much better virtually than they did in person.
Yeah.
My youngest she went from like failing everything. Now she's AB student. She is even taking extra classes. She's taking five classes each term instead of 4 this year so that she can actually graduate on time.
Awesome.
Next year. And that wouldn't have happened if she couldn't have done it virtually. And my other daughter has social anxiety. So she missed school a lot. And, the virtual has been fantastic for us. But tell us, I want to talk about your book a little bit because, it talks about your story and all of that, but, so tell us a little bit about your book.
All right. Well, the title of it is Tripolar, the story of a bipolar triathlete. And, I call it tripolar because, I got into triathlons in 2009. And that really helped my recovery. And I'm bipolar, so bipolar triathlete.
I love the title. I think it's awesome.
Tripolar. And also because, there's the threefold, and triathlons, there's swim, bike, run, the 3 components of the race. But in life, and me dealing with, my mental health, being a bipolar recovering addict, I got to deal with the physical, the mental and the spiritual aspect of it. So, that's kind of a trifold thing to treat all 3 parts for the whole person. And the book itself kind of, it's a memoir, kind of, goes in 3 parts. First part's, about the childhood trauma and, kind of, going into addiction. The second part's about like trying to, what it took to get sober, the bouts of rehab, the relapses. And the last part's about, what I've done in recovery over the last 14 plus years. And it really gets into a lot really into the race stories. Because early on in my triathlon and marathon career, I read several books like Born to Run by Dean Karnazes, Finding Ultra by Rich Roll, No Limits by Chrissy Wellington, books by other Ironman greats and other ultramarathon greats. And so I was kind of inspired by all theirs, and they talk a lot about different races they've won and done. I'm not a fast guy. I'm a middle of the pack kind of person, average Joe, but I'm out there doing it. And, so that it talks about a lot of the races I've done from, the 14 Ironmans I've done now, and then a bunch of the ultra marathons I've done. I've done several 100-mile endurance run races, which take a little while to finish.
Yeah, I bet. I'm lucky to complete a 5K at this point.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think all of us kind of have a little, I guess I hate to use the word crazy, but for us ultra runners, I mean, people don't understand us, and they say we have to have a little crazy to do it. But one of my best friends, or well, not best friend, but good friend, who's an ultra runner, says, every time she's out there running an ultra marathon, she's like, I'm out here battling my demons, and I'm like, I can kind of relate with that, in a sense, we're all out here battling our demons, and this is just a therapeutic way to do it, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking with me, telling us a little bit about your story and, and all that. And I'm sure that by you coming on and sharing your story and, the path to your recovery and everything, there's going to be some listeners out there that are going to be like, hey, I'm not alone. Somebody else has gone through this too. So thank you. How can our listeners find you?
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. Listeners can find me at ultratimdavis.com. And like that, my social media tags are there, which is ultratimdavis1 and tripolar_Tim. And I've already been on like 40 other podcasts too. So if you just Google Tripolar Tim Davis, my book and a lot of the podcasts I've already been on will pop up. So.
Awesome. And listeners, that I will have all of Tim's contact information, the link to his book, everything down in the show notes. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com if you're listening from one of our partner stations. Pull up Tim's episode and everything will be there for you. So Tim, thank you again. This has been an awesome conversation.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. This is great.
And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.